Hello and welcome to Nikolay's genetics lessons, and this video going to be about genetics, animals breeding and selection. And topic of today's video is why black pigment is dominant and white is recessive. And white is recessive not only to black but also to any other pigments. For example, red, yellow or orange. And here's my explanation. Um, First of all, there is no such pigment that would produce white color. Actually, white color means no pigment at all. And here's my explanation. What you see on this picture is a clear glass. It is transparent. But what would happen if we would crush it? As you see on this picture, it's still transparent, but of course not as transparent as on the first picture. And if we would put a newspaper underneath, we would have a problem to read it. And here we would have no problem to read the newspaper if we put underneath this glass. And what would happen if we would crash this glass even to smaller pieces? And this is what would happen. And on this picture, this is still the same glass, but now it's crashed even to smaller particles. And now you can call this color as snow white. So we start with transparent and ended up with snow white color. This is the same glass as here. And now this glass looks like snow white, not because its chemicals properties have changed, but because its physical properties have changed that now cause light to be reflected in different directions. So if light would come from this source, it would be reflected under the different angles. Some of light would be reflected back, but for example here we would see less reflection in the different directions, and probably more light would be reflected back, would go through the glass and then would be reflected back. And here all the rays of light would be reflected back after they would go through the glass, would be reflected back. And now we can move to the next set of pictures, and this picture represent what glass might look like if we would sandblast it or would use sandpaper. Now we cannot say that this is transparent. We can say that this glass is translucent. And here we have about the same what happened here, but here we have transparent glass, but the surface of this glass is not even. So the surface would look like this because of the small scratches, and the sun, also sunbeams that would fall on such surface, some of them would go through and would be returned back, but some of them would be scattered and would be reflected in different directions. So the glass, most of the glass would be the same as on this picture, but the surface, physical properties of surface would be changed. And this is exactly what we can see in nails, for example. Nails are made from the same proteins as hairs made, as fur of the animals is made, nails made from keratin. Keratin is a kind of polyprotein that resembles polyethylene plastic, and if all the pigments would be absent, we also may see such pictures as this one. So here you see a fish, and it's totally transparent, as you see, for example, on this picture. So this fish doesn't have any pigments at all. And for example, we humans, we have pigments throughout our bodies. Our skin has many pigments that absorb ultraviolet and give us certain tone of our skin. Our hairs also has pigments, and what may happen if we wouldn't have a pigment? In this case, our hairs, as well as hairs of animals, would become white. Not transparent, but white because of the physical properties of the keratin itself and hairs. Some of these animals are albino and some are not, like this cat here. And how we can tell the difference? Albino has red eyes because it has not pigment at all, and those that has a pigment in their eyes, we cannot say that this is albino because they still can produce pigment to some extent, at least in the iris of their eyes. And this dog here also is not albino. Once again, there is not such a pigment as Y pigment, and Y color we would get every time when normal pigment or genes that code for the normal pigment would be mutated and wouldn't be able to produce normal pigment anymore. But it doesn't mean that animals would be transparent, they would be white. And this peacock here also white, as you see, though it doesn't has fur, but feathers are made from the same keratin as a fur. And you may say that in the autumn, for example, you may find such a picture like this, and you may ask why in the leaf one pigment, when it is destroyed, like green one, would become red and then, for example, yellow. Actually, green pigment is not becoming red or yellow. All these pigments, green, red, and yellow, are present in the leaf. But when leaf dies, first of all, green pigment would be destroyed, and it just relieves red pigment that were present there. And some of the pigments that we perceive as colors are never present. This is just a physical properties of the surfaces. And slide I'm going to explain those they don't have a pigment still may produce a color that we perceive at least as a color. So on this picture, this is a human hair, and as you see, the surface is not even. It is made of the keratinized cells, and those if this hair doesn't have a pigment, our eyes can perceive this translucent hair as white because the surface of this hair would scatter rays of light in different directions, and we would perceive such hairs as white hairs. Both these photos are made with electronic microscopy, and electrons cannot pass through the hairs or any dense objects, so even transparent and translucent objects would look like solid. But I want to show you on these pictures that hairs are not empty inside. They're full of keratin fibers, and those people who think that when you get older and your hairs become white, they're hollow inside, this is not true. You just would lose pigment that is can be found here, but physical properties of the hairs is not changed. Some changes, of course, would be present, but this not create a hole inside of the hair. And hair by itself is not as simple as you might think. It consists of 8 different structural layers, and of course when light goes through such a hair, it also would be reflected under the different angles because of this inconsistency of the keratin fiber inside of the hair. And on this picture is made with light microscope. You see that one hair on top of these 2 hairs, and it is translucent, so we can see through it. Now when you know that white color is actually absence of color, a little bit of genetics, imagine that we have one animal whose genotype is capital A, small a, and we cross with another animal whose genotype is also capital A, small a. So both these animals would be carriers for pigment absence. So the following generation genotype can be as follows: capital A. So capital A stands for the normal color production, and small a stands for the absence of color. So here we would have capital A small a small a here, and small a here. As you see, albino can appear from as a result of the cross of 2 normal parents, and probability would be 25% if both parents would be carriers, and 75% probability that progeny would have a pigment. So basically we can rewrite this Punnett square as presence of pigment and another gene that cannot produce a pigment. We cross with another animal that one allele can produce a pigment on one chromosome, and another allele on the other chromosome cannot produce a pigment. And as you see, we would get the same results, but maybe this table would explain you a little bit better than the first one what happens here. So here we have on both chromosomes 2 normal genes that can produce a pigment, and here we have on one of the chromosome normal gene and another gene that is mutated and cannot produce a pigment. But still, as you see, on the one chromosome one gene would be able to produce a pigment, and this animal also would be able to produce a pigment, and this trait always dominant. But in some cases, for example in plants, we can see that some of the plants that is heterozygous can be can produce less pigment, and we call such situation as incomplete dominance. For example, if this dominant allele A code for the red color, then when we have two alleles, these two alleles would produce much more red color, red pigment than one allele, and this flower would be red. But when we have heterozygous genotype, the color of flowers would be pink. And when both alleles would be defective, we would have a color of flowers as white. And sometimes this also can be applied to the animal's coloration, when heterozygous would produce less pigment than homozygous dominant, and of course homozygous recessive would be albino. According to this explanation, any pigment would be dominant to absence of pigment. So capital A may stand for the any pigment, and X here may stand for the mutated gene that cannot produce this pigment anymore. And not necessary that this gene would make this pigment. This gene may produce just enzyme that participate in production of the pigment, and there can be many such genes. For example, if we would represent production of the pigment as certain steps, there can be involved many genes. For example, we have a product 1 that is made by gene 1, then enzyme would be made that would affect this protein, and product number 2 would be made. Then different enzyme also would change this protein, and product number 3 would be made, and once again different enzyme. So here is enzyme number 1, number 2, and number 3 would make final conformation of this protein, and now this protein would become active, for example red pigment, protein that we perceive as red color. Now imagine that gene number 2 that produce enzyme number 2 would be mutated and wouldn't be able to produce normal enzyme, and this enzyme wouldn't be able to make a product number 3. So that means that here production of enzyme would stop, and we never would get this pigment. And this is true for both enzyme number 1 and number 3. No matter which one would be defective, we wouldn't get our enzyme. And now imagine such situation. I would use 2 chromosomes for the simplicity, and would put these 3 genes on this chromosome. So gene number 1, number 2, and number 3. And now imagine that gene number 2 here is defective. So this enzyme is not produced. So our pigment is not produced. Most of the animals are diploid, so would have another homologous chromosome, and chromosome number 2 also would have one of the genes that code for the enzyme 2 defective. So enzyme wouldn't be produced. Now imagine that we have another animal, and of course the same animal, the same species, has the same sequence, but this time enzyme number 1 would be mutated and wouldn't be able to perform its function, and this animal also wouldn't be able to produce pigment. So this animal would be white and this animal would be white. Now imagine that we made these two animals. No matter which chromosome, this one or this one, this one or this one, would end up in the gamete that would later join and form diploid zygote, and new organism would develop. We would have in this new diploid organisms these two chromosomes. So what would happen? We would have normal enzyme number 1, we would have normal enzyme number 3, and here we would have normal enzyme number 2 and normal enzyme number 3. So actually what has happened to albino parents produced progeny that is not albino. If you would use this explanation, you never would understand how organism that is homozygous for this trait, when we mate with another organism that is also homozygous defective for this trait, would produce normal progeny. So as you see, there is many different genetic reasons when animal may lose coloration. I know at least 20-30 different variants how this might happen, and that means that we can easily multiply by tenfold, because literally we just scratch the surface in our understanding how this mechanism works, and there are so many things that we still do not know and do not understand. But just understand that white color is not a pigment, and white color is not always necessary would be recessive. Sometimes white color can be dominant. For example, imagine that one diploid organism has a gene that produce pigment in this organism. We cross with another organism also diploid that also has normal genes for this same pigment, but result of such a cross, so by the way, this is going to be, for example, animal with red pigment, and this animal would be with white pigment. How this might happen? This animal with white pigment may have another gene that can be epistatic to these alleles. So what does it mean? This gene may produce such a protein that might bind to regulatory sequence of these two alleles and would cancel production of the proteins. And when we cross two such parents, what we might expect, no matter which chromosome this one or this chromosome, this organism would produce in the gametes, we would see in the next generation one chromosome from the parent that produce pigment. And for example, even if this is heterozygous animal for this trait, it is white because one gene would be enough to cancel production of the of this enzyme or this pigment on both chromosomes. So here we would have also this chromosome inherited in the progeny, and here we have two normal chromosomes with two normal genes that should produce normal pigment, but on this chromosome we have this gene that produce protein that would cancel production of this pigment by producing protein that would bind to this regulatory sequence of these alleles. So as a result, we would have progeny that would have white color, or pigment would be absent. And as I earlier explained, that would result in white color. And the probability of such an event would be 50%. So once again, if we build a Punnett square, so we have one organism that can produce two variants of the gametes, but both variants produce red pigment, and the second organism may produce two variants of the gametes, one variant that also would produce red pigment in the progeny, and another variant that has also normal gene but also would have this epistatic gene that cancel production of this protein. And in the F1 generation, what we can see that 50% of the progeny would have pigment, red pigment here, red pigment here, but here from this parent on the left, this progeny would inherit one normal gene, but from another parent would inherit one normal gene and another gene that is going to be epistatic and would affect production of the pigment, and this would result in white color. And the same we can see here. So also would result in white color. So as you see, the ratio would be 1 to 1 or 50 to 50%. So white parent, when we cross with another parent that can produce pigment, we would see that white would behave as dominant trait. And if this parent would be not heterozygous but homozygous for this trait, 100% in this case of the progeny would be white colored. So this parent would have white coloration, and 100% of its progeny also would have white color. Those another parent may be homozygous normal and can produce color. So as you see, there are many different mechanisms exist how white color may appear in the progeny, and the trait that disappeared, as in this example, may reappear from two parents who is both white and cannot produce a pigment. And this is all for today. Thank you for your attention. Please subscribe for my new videos that I post almost every day. Thumbs up if you like this video. Please write your comments, questions if you have any, and see you in the next video. Goodbye.